The poster was held up with two pieces of tape, both peeling at the corners. It had been on the wall long enough that the paper had yellowed slightly where the light hit it in the mornings, a slow fading that nobody noticed because it happened one day at a time. Freddie Bulsara noticed. He noticed everything about that poster. The way Jimmy stood slightly sideways, chin down, the guitar hanging off his body like an extension of something he'd been born with. The way his hands weren't performing for the camera. They were just there, resting on the strings, natural as breathing. Freddie had stared at that image so many times that he could close his eyes and reconstruct it perfectly. The curve of the headstock, the width of the strap, the barely visible coil of the cable disappearing off the bottom of the frame. It was 1969. Freddie was 22 years old and going nowhere fast. He had a small flat in Kensington, shared with two other people whose names he'd already half forgotten. He had a part-time job he never talked about. He had a guitar he'd owned for 3 years and played every day without getting significantly better, which was the kind of fact you could either accept or fight, and Freddie had not yet decided which one he was doing. He had ambition in the way that certain people have ambition before it has anywhere to go. Shapeless, pressurized, private. Something that woke him up at odd hours and had no clear address. What he had most of all was Jimmy. He'd seen him 4 times in concert. 4 times. He'd taken the train and the bus and once hitchhiked 20 minutes outside London to get to a venue, standing close enough to the stage that he could see Jimmy's fingers on the frets. He never screamed. He never rushed the barricade. He just watched, completely, almost medically, the way a student watches a professor work through a problem they cannot yet follow. He was trying to understand something that kept slipping just past the edge of comprehension. What is it, he'd think, watching? What is it that you know that I don't? It wasn't the technique, or not only the technique, not only the mechanics of it, the way Jimmy's thumb moved over the bass strings, while his fingers did something entirely separate above them. 2 separate conversations happening simultaneously on the same instrument. It was something underneath the technique, a relationship to the music that looked less like performance and more like confession. Like Jimmy wasn't playing for anyone in the room, like the audience was just present for something that was going to happen with or without them, and they happened to be close enough to feel it. Freddie wanted that. Not the guitar specifically, not the band, not any particular form. He wanted that relationship, that sense that the thing coming out of you was genuinely yours, not influenced, not borrowed, not a good version of something someone else had made first. Unambiguously, undeniably yours. He didn't know yet how to get there. The show at the Lyceum Ballroom in November was the 4th time. Freddie arrived early, positioned himself near the front, and waited with the patience of someone who had been waiting their whole life and was used to it by now. When Jimmy came on stage, the crowd compressed and surged, and Freddie planted his feet and didn't move. He watched the whole set the same way he always did. Still, focused, cataloging. What struck him that night wasn't the loudness. The loudness was expected. What struck him was the quiet that existed inside the loudness, the small decisions being made inside the noise. The fraction of a second before Jimmy hit a bend where you could hear him deciding how far to take it. The way he'd let a note decay past the point where most players would move on, just to see what it turned into. He was never in a hurry. Even at full volume, even when the room was shaking, there was something unhurried about him, something that said, I have time. The music has time. There is no emergency here. Freddie stood there for 90 minutes thinking about that. After the final song, the lights came up slowly and people began moving toward the exits in that loose, dazed way audiences move when they have had something taken out of them and replaced with something else. Freddie didn't move. He stood near the front and looked at the stage. The empty mic stands, the cables coiled on the floor, the roadies already beginning to break things down. He didn't know what he was waiting for. He just wasn't ready to leave yet. There was a door to the left of the stage that led backstage. Freddie had noticed it earlier. He watched it for a few minutes and then, without having made a clear decision, he walked toward it. There was no one guarding it. He went through. The backstage area was smaller than he'd imagined. A narrow corridor with exposed brick, a few folding chairs, cables everywhere. It smelled like sweat and cigarette smoke, and that particular electrical smell that comes from equipment running hot. Two roadies passed him without looking up. A woman with a clipboard walked briskly in the other direction. Nobody asked him who he was or what he was doing there, and so he kept walking. He passed a room where someone was restringing a guitar, working quickly, the way people work when they've done something 10,000 times. He passed another room with a half-eaten tray of food on a table and a jacket on the back of a chair. He felt like a tourist in a country whose language he almost spoke, familiar enough with the surroundings to move through them, unfamiliar enough that everything had a slight shimmer of unreality. He found Jimmy in a small room at the end of the corridor. The door was open. Jimmy was sitting on a wooden chair with his back to the wall, still in his performance clothes, a bottle of water in his hand. He wasn't talking to anyone. He wasn't on the phone. He was just sitting, in the way that performers sometimes sit right after coming off stage, present but slightly elsewhere, still in the process of coming back into the room. Freddie stopped in the doorway. For a moment, maybe 5 seconds, maybe longer, he couldn't move. This was the figure from the poster, the hands that had just done those things on that stage. The man who was somehow responsible for the fact that Freddie was alive in the particular way he wanted to be alive, and couldn't yet figure out how. Jimmy looked up. "Hey," he said, not suspicious, not bothered, just acknowledging. "Sorry," Freddie said. I just wanted to say it was extraordinary. Tonight, what you did." Jimmy nodded slowly. He'd heard this before, obviously. He heard it every night. But there was something in the way Freddie had said it, not gushing, not performed, that made him stay with it for a second longer than usual. "You play?" Jimmy asked. The question landed strangely. Freddie opened his mouth and then closed it. "Guitar," Jimmy said. "You look like someone who plays." "I try," Freddie said. I'm nowhere near." He stopped. "I try." Jimmy looked at him for a moment. Then he nodded at the guitar case in the corner of the room. "There's a guitar in that case, if you want." Later, Freddie would struggle to explain what made him do what he did next. He had no business picking up a guitar in front of Jimi Hendrix. He knew that. He was not a skilled guitarist. He was at best someone who understood music well enough to know exactly how far he was from good. The rational response would have been to laugh it off, say goodnight, leave the way he came. He walked to the case and opened it. It was a battered acoustic. Nothing special, the kind of guitar that lives in backstage rooms and recording studios and gets used by whoever needs it. He picked it up and sat down in the other chair and put it on his knee. His hands were not entirely steady. He started playing. Not a Jimmy song. Not anything impressive. He played a chord progression he'd been working on for weeks, something he'd been building in pieces in his flat at 2 in the morning when he couldn't sleep. It was simple. 4 chords, a melody sitting on top of them. But it was his. It came from somewhere real, and so he played it the only way he knew how to play it, which was completely. He played for maybe 90 seconds. Then he stopped and looked up. Jimmy hadn't moved. He was still sitting with his back against the wall, water bottle in his hand, watching. His expression was neutral, not politely indifferent, not impressed, just attentive in that focused way he had, the way he watched everything. The silence lasted a moment. "What's that called?" Jimmy asked. "Nothing yet," Freddie said. Jimmy nodded. "The way you heard that melody," he said. "That's not nothing. That was it. 7 words. No lesson, no extended analysis, no suggestion that Freddie should pursue music or that he had something special. Just a quiet observation, made and left on the table, not pushed further." Jimmy finished his water and someone came to the door to tell him the car was ready, and Freddie stood and thanked him, and Jimmy nodded and said something like, "Take care of yourself." And that was the end of it. Freddie walked back through the corridor, past the roadies and the folding chairs, out through the door he'd come in, and into the cold of the November street. He stood there for a long time before he started walking. "The way you heard that melody, that's not nothing." He turned it over the whole way home. It wasn't praise exactly. Jimmy hadn't said the melody was good, hadn't said Freddie could play, hadn't offered any version of "you're talented, keep going." He had said something more specific and, in a way, more demanding, that a particular thing Freddie had done, the way he'd heard something, the way he'd translated an internal sound into 6 strings and 10 fingers, was real, was particular to him, was not the same as anyone else doing it, was not nothing. There was a distinction buried in those 7 words that Freddie spent the rest of the walk trying to excavate. The melody wasn't praised, his skill wasn't praised. The way he'd heard it, the act of listening, of receiving something, of having it arrive in him in a particular shape, that was what Jimi had noticed. That was the thing being pointed to. As if to say, the instrument doesn't matter. The technique will come or it won't. What matters is whether the thing you're trying to say is genuinely yours or whether you're decorating someone else's idea with your hands. He got home at midnight. His flatmates were asleep. He sat in the kitchen for a long time in the dark. He didn't tell people about that night. Not for years. It wasn't the kind of story he knew how to tell without it sounding like name-dropping. And it wasn't really about Jimi, not ultimately. It was about himself, about what he'd heard in those 7 words. And that wasn't something you handed to someone else. What happened afterward happened slowly, the way real changes happen. He started writing more. He stopped trying to play guitar like anyone else and started playing it like himself, which meant accepting that his hands wanted to do things that weren't technically correct and going ahead and letting them. He started thinking about his voice differently, not as one instrument among several, but as the primary one, the one everything else was in service of. He started thinking about the stage not as a place where you performed, but as a place where you became. Jimi died in September 1970. Freddie heard the news in the morning and sat with it for a long time before he could move. By then, Queen was starting to take shape. By then, the poster on the wall had been replaced. Not thrown away, just moved, put somewhere more careful. By then, Freddie Bulsara was becoming someone else, someone who had understood something that night in a dressing room about the relationship between what you hear inside yourself and what you have the nerve to put into the world. In a 1982 interview, a journalist asked Freddie Mercury about his influences. He gave the usual answers. Opera, Liza Minnelli, the things he was known for saying. Then at the end, almost as an aside, he said, Jimi Hendrix, of course, always Jimi. He understood something about performance that I've spent my whole career trying to articulate. He didn't elaborate. The interviewer moved on. But there was a pause before he said it. A small one. The kind of pause that has something behind it. The way you heard that melody, that's not nothing.